Brit meter without a plugin. Is it possible? Absolutely. Now, I will warn you is that in order to disable dashing, it's not an easy thing to do. As a matter of fact, you do require a plugin to disable dashing, but you can play around with the parameters in RPG Maker to make it look like the player is dashing and not dashing. What's up, dogs? Name's TheOdie, and this tutorial was brought to me thanks to one of you guys who actually filled out the form on my website and asked me it there, and I gotta say, that's just awesome! Congrats, you're the first person to use it and contact me that way, and I am super hyped to get this one going, just for you, so let's do it! Alright, before we get started, the first thing we're going to need to do is to have our graphics for the stamina bar. As you can see, I already made mine, but I'll go ahead and show you guys how you can make one if you guys need a little bit of help there. So what I use a program called GIMP, and I'm going to create a canvas that's the exact same size as this game window, which is 816 by 624. Then I'm gonna hit play, new game, and I'm just gonna take a screenshot without print screen. Then in here, I'll just control paste, and here it is. And then I just gotta line it up perfectly. There we go. And we'll turn this into a new layer. And then I'm going to view, show grid, and image, configure grid, and each tile is 48 by 48. And there we go. Now it's like a perfect representation of our editor here. And now we can create our stamina bar however we like. If you want it on the top corner here, then you can do that. But what I did was I made it just so that it's a little bit above the player. So you can make it however you want, however long, however tall, and just use your paint bucket tool. And make sure you use a new layer for it. I'll do black. And then I'm going to create another new layer. And I'm going to do select, shrink by 1 pixel. So that's a little bit smaller. This way it has like an outline. And the stamina bar itself will be yellow. Ta-da! So essentially what's going to occur is that the bar will shrink. And the way it's going to shrink is like this. So as it shrinks like that, we will have at least this black part behind it to give it a little bit more of a pop. Now what I'm also going to do is make sure I got the size of this. And the size of this is 48 by 14. So what I will do is just create a new one. Make it by 48 by 14. And then you can just paste it. Oops. This is the one you want to copy. So control copy, and control paste. And then we make a new one. So for here, make sure it's highlighted. Click here, control copy, click on this window, control paste, and then right click and do new layer or N for shortcut. So now we don't need this anymore, and I can go ahead and discard that. And I can open this up, and I can scroll in and see how it looks, and it looks great to me. So I'm going to hide those two and export this one. And you know what? I'll go ahead and overwrite the one I created. This way we're both working with the same stamina bar in a sense. So I named mine Stamina Bar Fill, which is the yellow one, and it will replace it. Export. And then the back one, or the backdrop, export as, backdrop, export, replace. There you go. Okay. So now that we have the image created, let's finally get ahead and do this. So I'm going to create this in my common events. And the reason I'm going to create it in the common events is so that this will still be able to work regardless of what map I'm transferring between, and it will also be toggled by a switch. But before that, we also need to initialize everything. So let's think about everything we need here. We're going to, 1, have a stamina meter. When the player is moving, the stamina meter will drain. After some time, when the player has stopped moving, the stamina bar will slowly regenerate. And of course, we need to show that with the bar. So the first one is to create the stamina bar. So I'm going to go ahead and call this one stamina. And I'll do init, which stands for initializing. We're going to control a variable. And I'm going to create a new one. I'll do it here, and I'll call it stamina. And I'm going to have it out of 100. I think that's a good, wholesome number. And while we're initializing everything, we also need to show the pictures, the meters. And we got to link the meters to these variables. So the way it works is if I go to show picture, the way it's going to increase and decrease is through its scale and the width. Of course, if yours is vertical, then you'll probably want height. So the other thing to note is the importance of your picture layer. So 1 is at the very bottom and 100, which is your max, that's the very topmost. So of course, if you don't want your meters to be in front of cutscenes or any pictures that you got going on, then you want to make sure that it's on layer 1 and layer 2. Layer 1 is of course going to be your backdrop. And layer 2 is going to be your fill. So I do want my backdrop just to be ever so slightly transparent. And I'll go with 150. That might be good actually. Apply. And the other thing we gotta think about next is, well, the location of, or the position of the images. So right now it's in accordance to upper left, but I find that using the center is a lot easier to maneuver around. So I'm gonna go ahead and choose center. And to get the very center of your page, you want to go to System 2, see your width and height, and just divide both of them by 2. So 408 and 312. 408, 312, and same for you. 408, 312. And we can actually go ahead and test that out, oopsies, by highlighting these two and pressing Ctrl R. And you can see the meter right there, but it's kind of blocking the player, and I kind of want it to be just above them. So what I'm going to do is have to do a bit of math, but the math here is actually pretty easy. We know that each box is 48 by 48 pixels, and yes, these positioning is by pixels and not by tiles. The other thing we know is that with RPG Maker, the top left corner is 0, 0, and it increases as we go to the right and as we go down. So if we want it to be above the player, then we're going to have to decrease the Y. So I'm just going to have it in the center of the tile above it. So I'm going to take 312 and do minus and subtract 48. I'm a little bit lazy to do the math in my head, so I'm going to just do it like this, 264. And there we have it. Looks pretty dang good to me. So now we got the picture in the position that we want it to be. However, what we don't have is this link to our variable. As I mentioned, it's going to be controlled with the width, and of course we cannot assign a variable to the scale here, here, the scale here. So what we're going to do is what's called a script call. And if you guys have not used script calls before, then do not worry, it's actually very simple. You just gotta type stuff. So what I have in front of me is a library of script calls for MV and MZ. And essentially, these are all of your event commands, as you can tell, like control variable, self switch, conditional branch, loop, etc., etc. And what it does is they give you the script calls. So what I'm going to do is do control find and look for show picture. So then it brings me to the picture category, and the one we want is show picture. So I'm just going to go ahead, highlight all of this, and control copy, go back to RPG Maker, and script control paste, and I'm just gonna have it on one line. And if you guys are interested in that library of functions, then do not worry, it's linked down in the descriptions below. I did not create it. Some great community of RPG Maker folks created it, and we can't thank them enough for it. So if you were to look at the script and the event command, you'll actually see that they're very similar in a lot of ways. We got the picture ID over here, which is the number 1 that you see there, the name of the file, the origin, X, Y, scale, opacity, and blend mode. So it's actually very, very literal to how we see it, and we just gotta change it from what we see to what it needs to be. And I believe this has to be in parentheses, but I'll double check it in an instant. For the origin, I believe it's a 1, 264, scale X. We'll keep it as 100 for now. Opacity 150 and blend mode 1. And we're going to do the same thing for the other one, except this one will say stamina bar fill number 2. And we want this to be 255. Apply. So, oh, I forgot the B is actually uppercase. And now to test this, I can highlight them both and press Ctrl R. Let's see if I typed it right. Hey, what do you know? I typed it right. Good job, me. I'm actually quite proud. Okay, so the other thing I want to note is if I were to go here to where the scaling is, so I'm going to put this as 50. And I can go ahead and delete these two now. And I hit Ctrl R. You're going to notice something. See how the way it shrinks? And I'm going to do it as 10. You probably noticed by now that it shrinks towards the center. But however, in most game, and probably what you want it to shrink from right to left. Well, don't worry, we'll cover that part towards the very end. It's just a bit complicated because there's a lot of math involved, but do note that we will save it towards the end. However, if you like it this way, then you don't have to worry about it at all. Closing that here, apply. So now I'm going to link this variable to our image. And that's where you see this 10. And we're going to do game variables.value 32 and apply. So this is a script call to call a value of a variable 32 because that's the ID of this variable that you see here. And game variables, you do need to make sure that it's cap sensitive and that you got the money sign right there. And you also got to make sure that V is also lowercase. So now we should not see a bar at all because the value should be 0. Awesome. Now if I were to highlight that one and test it, we should see the bar in full as 100. Ho ho! Absolutely beautiful. So now we got it all linked together. Isn't that sick nastiness? Last thing we gotta do is that we gotta turn on a switch. And that switch will be stamina. Stamina. Apply. And by the way, if in case you guys ever wonder how I'm able to hit the OK so fast, you just hold down Control and hit Enter. Apply. Alright, so we're going to go to the next common event, and this one will be stamina. I'll call it the engine. And the trigger will be parallel process, and of course it is acting off the stamina switch. Apply. So for this one, we need to test for when the player is holding down the sprint button and has moved. So of course we're going to need a conditional branch, and for most people the sprint button is shift. So I'm going to go for shift, and if it's being pressed. Okay, and apply. And then the next one we need is for if the player is moving. So for this case, we're going to need to create some variables. And we're going to need 4 variables in total. Oh man. I kind of wish I had 4 slots open there. Oh, I'll just put it here. Me and my messy variable order. That's the only thing I dislike about RPG Maker. How messy the variable ordinance gets. Is that a word? Ordinance? Anyways, stamina, previous X. No, I don't know why I have it down there. I'll put it here. And then bottom one will be previous Y. And then for this one, I'll say cur X and cur Y for current. Okay. So we want this one to equal player X and the other one to equal player Y. And don't worry, we will remove it from this conditional branch. So we're going to need something that constantly updates the engine for the player's X and Y location. And then in here, we need to actually test, or actually, what I'm going to do is, I'll test it in here. So in here, we need to test whether or not the X and Y are equal. And if you're a little bit confused, don't worry, I will cover it in a second in greater detail once we have it all written out. So already, right off the bat, you should know in your head that these two are being updated with the player's location. And stamina, previous X and previous Y should currently equal 0. So if the shift button is being toggled and the player is not in the same position as previously, then we want to update previous X to current X and previous Y. Oopsies, keep hitting that button. To current Y. So here we go. If the shift button is not being pressed, then that means the player is not sprinting. And even though the current X and Y is being updated, the previous X and Y is not. Which reminds me that this is supposed to say not equal to. Boom. And then when this happens, we just need to remove a chunk of our stamina through that control variable, wherever our stamina is. I should probably move it, huh? Yeah, I'll move it. This way I don't get too confused. And I'm gonna remove, let's just use 10 per tile that the player moves. So let me just fix that in here. Change it to ID 56, which means we also have to change this to ID 56. Oopsies. Apply. So going back in here, we also need to make another test for if the stamina bar is 10 or greater. And we cut this and paste it in here. And then the last thing we gotta do is make sure that the pictures remain updated. So I'm actually gonna do it in here. And the one we're going to do is instead move picture. So move picture, on the other hand, is all of this. Copy. And go to script and paste it all in. And then this one is ID 2. Origin is center. Which one was the center? 1? 1 is the center. Okay. I would think that 2 would be the center. X will remain 408 and 264. 408, 264. Scale. I can actually start copying and pasting all this, huh? Scale is that. I don't know why I copied all that. All I needed was that portion. Scale Y is 100, opacity is 255, blend mode is 1, oh god, not 14, and duration, we'll do it in 1 frame. Apply. So now, let me just create an event here, and we'll talk to this guy, and he will do a common event to call stamina init. Apply. And run it. Run it. Boop. We got stamina bar. And boop. Boop, 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 boop. Okay. So it's pretty buggy, as you can tell. Alright, I got it working. Haha. Okay, so what was going on there? This actually needs to be on the else branch. I completely forgot because the x and y can be equal to the same, but the y's can be different. So that's the error there. The other thing I did was I decided to change up a couple of the parameters in here. So yours might say 406, it's actually 408. The other thing is that over here, this blend type, it actually starts at 0 and not at 1. So 0 is normal. That said, in init, the same thing is true there. So you want it at 0, but you do want this at 1, so that is in the center. So this one is also 0. Lastly, I changed the opacity to 100 for the backdrop, just to make it a little bit more transparent. So if you noticed, the moment I hit shift, I lose some stamina. To fix that, this is where it's going to get rather confusing. But first, I want to make sure that you understand what's going on with the current process. So even though we're not hitting the sprint button, these two variables are constantly being updated with the player's position. Then when we toggle the sprint, as long as we have enough sprint energy to use up, then if the position of the player has moved, which is the current tracking of the x or the y compared to the previous tracking of the x or the y, which currently equals 0, then it's going to reset the previous x and y to the current x and y, and then it's going to subtract 10 from the stamina meter, and then it's going to update the picture. So based on this process, the current x and y is constantly being updated. The previous x and y is only being updated when the player has moved while the shift is being toggled. So now what I'm going to do instead is take the previous x and y and have it updated the moment the shift button gets toggled. And once this gets toggled, we're going to lock the system in such that for as long as the player continues to have the shift button press, then it can drain my stamina and update the position of the movement. And for us to lock in this code here, we are going to use a loop. So cut this and paste it in here. So that means when the shift button is no longer being pressed, we're going to break the loop and it will be free. Which also means we need to update the picture within the loop. However, while this event is currently locked inside the loop, you'll notice that the current x and y is no longer being updated. As you can see, nothing points it out inside this loop. So we're going to need to bring that in. Copy and paste it in here. Now the last thing to mention is that whenever you have a loop inside a parallel process, it will lag. And the reason for that is because the loop actually moves so much more faster than the parallel process. And the parallel process is also trying to update every single frame. So it's very demanding. So to help assist with that, at the very end, I'm going to just add a wait command of 1 frame. Okay, and Control R. The reason why the wait 1 frame works is because no matter what the player does in terms of their input, they will not be faster than 1 fraction of a second. So here I am hitting shift and now moving. And you can see that it works. So I'm going to just talk to them to refresh it. And I release my shift button and it works. Now I'm gonna hit shift again and it still works. Cool. So I'm gonna move first and then I'm gonna hit shift. Sweet. So now we just gotta link up the player's actual ability to dash and to take away their dash. And unfortunately, this is not as simple as doing a script call and saying disable dashing or enable dashing. Instead, you do have to write an entire plugin, a short plugin, but don't worry, we won't be doing that because this actually exists almost everywhere on the internet. Here's one for example. Even though it says it's for MV, this actually still works for MZ. And if you go ahead and download it, this is all it looks like. And if you're worried whether or not Gelv is a free plugin even for your commercial games, it actually has a terms of use here, and you will see that for commercial use, scripts that are not free for commercial use will contain a note in the script comment below, such as this. But as you can see, it does not contain this, which means they are free for commercial use. Basically, all you have to do is credit them. And this is true for a lot of other uploaders on the internet. The reason why I went with Gelv is because if you saw my Phasmophobia RPG maker, I've used a lot of Gelv script, and his is some that I can trust and know for sure that they are free for commercial use and non-commercial use, as long as it does not contain this and that I credit him. Now, what if you don't want to use scripts at all? Can you get away with making this possible? And the answer to that is yes, you can. Except we will have to trick RPG Maker a little bit. First of all, we won't actually be working with dashing. So we gotta disable dashing. Because what we're actually going to be doing is changing the player's move speed. So I'm gonna just do it in here. This way we can actually test it out. I'm going to type in gameplayer.movespeed. I forgot whether or not you need a parentheses, which is why I'm testing it first. Okay, so this is how you actually type it out. So make sure it's ._movespeed with S capitalized, and you can set a number. The cool thing here is that you can do decimal numbers as well. So you can get very specific with how fast you want your player to move. Okay, so I'm gonna just take this and then delete the rest. Okay, go back into our database, and the speed will increase when the player is holding down the shift button. And it should decrease back to normal when the loop plans to break. 4 is your normal speed, by the way. Except here, we will need to make sure that the stamina is in fact greater than or equal to 10. And there you guys have it. So I'm going to just refresh it and holding sprint. Release sprint and holding sprint. And there you guys can see that my sprint is gone. So it's a little bit of a cheat, but it is the way around it. So what if instead you want to use the script? Well, after you download Gelv's disable dash, then just go over to game, open folder, into JS, plugins, and you're just gonna put it in here. So here's the disable dashing that we got from Gelv. And just do copy and paste it in. And then I just go into my plugins manager, go for Gelv disable dash, and he'll show you what you got to do, which is to use a script call and call these two functions here. So if you want this one, control copy. Okay. I have to re-enable dashing. Go into my common events where I see this, and I'm gonna just replace it completely with that. Copy and paste, but change this to false. delete that, copy, and paste, and delete that. So now I hit Control R, yes, holding down sprint, and moving. And it's been disabled. Sprint, 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 and can't sprint anymore. So there you guys have it. One of two options. This one, you will have to credit Galv for what he created. Otherwise, if you don't mind, disable dashing on all of your maps. And then you guys can play around with how fast the player can move for their sprint speed. Okay, so now that we got all of that linked in together, the last thing we got to do is to make sure that the stamina bar does regenerate. So recall that 60 frames equals 1 second. And above here, I'm going to create a new variable. And I'm going to call this stamina timer. And I'm going to have it increment by 1. And then just below it, I'm going to have a conditional branch. And this conditional branch is going to say if stamina timer equals, and here is how we're going to decide how long will it take for the stamina bar to start recovering. I'm going to say once 3 seconds has occurred, then the stamina bar will start to increment. So I'm just going to go to control variables and do stamina, and it's going to increment. Let's have it increase by 1 per frame. And we're going to reset the stamina timer back down to some value. I'm going to say 179. So what this means is that stamina timer is going to initialize as 0, but for every frame that this goes through, stamina timer will increment. Once it hits 180, the stamina bar will increment by 1, and then it will reset stamina timer back down to 179 so that when it loops again, then it will be equal to 180 because of this, and then this will continue to increment, which also means we need to make another conditional branch. And that's if stamina is equal to 100. Or rather, if it does not equal 100. And now I'll take this on the outside and put this in here. And I actually want to take this stamina timer, control copy it, and put it inside where the player is moving and confirm to be burning off their stamina. And I want to set it back down to 0. And I'll do it here as well. Apply and run. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi. That's pretty dope. Not gonna lie, that's really dope. I like seeing the way you did that. Go for it, go for it. Oh, damn, that's beautiful. Nice, nice, nice. So right now I'm holding down my shift button, and we can see that the player is actually burning it the moment it toggles back, or moment you regain 10 stamina. That's pretty sick, right? Yes, yes, yes. So with that said, if you want to decrease the amount of stamina that the player regains over time, then just set this as a different number. You get 175, and it'll regenerate a lot more slower. Ta-da! Play with the numbers, have fun with it, and you'll come up with something pretty neat. Okay, so now we got our stamina built together. Let's just make it a little bit more cleaner and have the image of the stamina bar to fade in and fade out after some time has passed by. So I'm going to scroll all the way down, grab this, cut it, go all the way back up to where we see this, and I am going to paste this in here, but I'm going to add a conditional else branch for when the stamina bar is at 100, And we're just gonna have the opacity go down to 0. And we're gonna decide how long it takes. Remember, 60 frames is 1 second, and I think 1 full second is pretty nice. But of course, don't forget that we do have to do the same for image 1. And don't forget that we do have to change this to 100 for the X scale. And the opacity will go down to 0 as that, which means we also need to pull it out here and have the opacity as whatever you set before. Mine was 100, and it'll take 1 frame. So just change that ID 1. Oops, opacity is actually this one and not that one. And we also gotta make sure that it's in here as well. And then give it some time. Look at it go. Look at it go. Oh my god, it's going. And then, peace. That is dope. Which also means that over in Stamina Initialize, we actually want to go to these pictures and start their opacity as 0. This way, when you're going through your cutscene, the cutscene ends, and the cutscene says, hey, let's initialize it. You don't have that meter flashing at you. It starts off invisible, and then when you're sprinting, there it goes. Then when it recovers, it's going to do its recovery thing, and then it's going to go away. So now it's more fluid. It looks so much more better. Peace, stamina bar. Peace. So there you guys have it. Change the parameters as you like. I think 175 is a bit too slow, so I'm going to try 177 later on. But other than that, if you guys want to change the amount of stamina that gets burned, you do have to change the parameter here, 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 and here. So it might actually be clever to have something in stamina init, copy paste, and call it stamina costs, and then make it equal some number. So let's say 5 instead, so that whenever we see it, wherever you see that 10, you just want to replace it with stamina costs. Stamina costs, stamina costs, stamina costs. Stamina cost. There you guys have it. Now you can just play with this to mess around. And if you do some weird odd number like 7, then instead of saying equal for the conditions, you do want to make sure you're using the greater than or equal. Recover, 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 recover. Peace. Peace. Alright, so the last thing I said that I would do for you guys is to make sure that the bar will shrink from the right to the left instead of towards the center like that. So to help me explain, I decided to whip out Clip Art Studio to do a little bit of drawing. So here we have our bar, and it's in its fullest. But let's say that the bar depletes by this much, meaning that all of this will become empty space. And I'll denote the empty space by this gray color here. So the greenmost outline is the bar in its fullest, and this section here is the bar that's been depleted, and this here is how much of the bar is left. So let's say that this is about the bar having shrunk down by 50%. So now, based on this image, we know that this must be 25% and this must be 25%. So if we were to move the bar to the left, then we would have to move it by 25%, even though it depleted by 50%. So I'm gonna start by giving the bar a couple of names, and I'll just do it in blue. So if we had the bar B, and I'll sub it as F for the full bar itself, and then as the shrunken bar, I'll call it bar C for current amount of bar that's left, and then this empty space, all of this empty space can be B E for empty parts of the bar. So we obviously know that if we want to see how much of this empty space there is, then we just do B sub E equals BF minus BC. Except we don't need the full entire emptiness. We only need half of the emptiness. So the distance that we're going to end up moving the bar to the left has to be 1/2 of BE. So that means when we're in RPG Maker, and remember how we designated the X distance as 408 because 408 is the direct middle of the screen. So that means the new distance D will be 408, which is the very center of the screen, minus, because we're moving it to the left, 1/2 of B sub E. But we know that B sub E is the full bar minus the bar that it's currently at. Okay, so now that we got our equation, the only thing we gotta do left is substitute it into RPG Maker. Just make sure that you know that BF bar full is not 100. It is the width of your bar. Mine is 48 pixels, so mine will be 48. When you go to B sub C, or bar current, that will be the percentage of how much is filled up. So going on over here, we got 408, which is the direct middle. It's our initial. So subtraction, because the bar is going to the left. And then that's where we punch everything in. What I'm going to do is, in parentheses, 100 minus game variables dot value 56 times 48, because 48 is exactly the length of my bar. 100 minus the current bar width will tell us out of 100 how much is not there. So that means we're going to have to divide it by 100 after we multiply by 48, and then divide it by 2. So again, 100 minus the current bar, because 100% minus, let's say, 69%, we get 31%. 31% times 48 will be some number, divided by 100 to get rid of the 100%, and then divided by 2 so we can get this portion here. So now I'm going to just grab all of this, Control copy, head on into the engine, and paste it wherever we see that 408 for ID2. We don't have to do it for ID1 because obviously ID is just a backdrop. And there you guys have it. Regenerate! It is a little bit twitchy, and the reason for that is because RPG Maker does not do a good job when showing pictures and using decimals or fractions, not to mention with how small 48 pixels is to work with. And what happens with RPG Maker is that it's rounding up or rounding down. So that's why we're getting all that bounce there, and then it looks perfect towards the end. Alright guys, so there you guys have it. Sprint meter without a plugin. A little bit complicating, I'll admit, but hopefully this allows you to think around the idea of how this can be done and other ways that you can do this. I know that some of you guys were probably thinking, well, why can't you just do if the player is holding sprint and pressing the arrow keys instead of having to track the player's location all the time? And the reason for that is because if you go up against the wall and you start dashing at it, you're going to drain some stamina that way, and maybe that's what you want, but if you don't want that, then you will have to track the player's location instead of figuring out if they're pressing the arrow keys or the movement keys for that matter. If you guys enjoyed, please hit that like button. I appreciate it so very much. Check out my website to see what other cool tutorials are going on, or to take some sneak peeks on the game I'm creating called Caster's Trap. If you're interested in the development there, then BAM! I did so well. Devlog series. Subscribe if you're new and are interested in more tutorials or with my game, and I'll see you in the next one. Till then, later!